Okay, I'd like to call this work session of October 22nd, 2019 to order. And we have 2 items on the agenda, so let's try to make sure that we cover the 2 items. The first one will take maybe 30 minutes or a little bit more, and then we'll switch to the other item. So our manager, Katie Rodriguez. See, I can roll my R's. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Councilmember Garcia, and I'm still working on that rolling my R. As you know, the Lyndale Avenue reconstruction project is over budget by about $3 million. The project is over budget due to increased construction costs and because that very early preliminary estimate of the cost was not updated as the engineering developed. Frankly, we had an insufficient process internally, and we were not regularly updating that budget. We didn't have a good process of departments talking to each other. We also didn't have a good process for communicating it to you. So tonight, we're going to propose both a proposal for the specific Lyndale project to cover that $3 million gap, also more comprehensive procedures so this never happens again, and that there's regular checks and balances, better communication across departments, and better communication with the council. Tonight, we're seeking feedback on both the proposal for Lyndale, but also the proposal for those new procedures. And I'll let Director Asher take us through the details of the project budgets. She's also going to give you an update on some of the other major capital projects that we're undertaking or hopefully going to undertake. And then Director Regis will give you a look at how the specific proposal will impact both the CIB and CIP. Director Asher.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and council members for your time tonight. We're gonna, like Katie said, I'll be going over Lyndale and how it kind of progressed or didn't progress the way that it should have. And then update on 66th Street, where we're at with that, and 77th Underpass. Then I have a draft 5-year street reconstruction plan that shows what we're proposing. And then also kind of the changes that occurred earlier when we went through the CIP, when we pushed those projects out. With our current 5-year plan is not reflective of those changes either. But I did want to mention that overall, when we do our projects, the projects have multiple funding sources, and multiple funding sources can be used on several projects. And so there's a lot of dynamics that can go into projects, and you'll see that with what we're proposing for Lyndale and how it works with 66th Street to come up with a somewhat of a solution for this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through our typical process for our capital planning, funding related, and I'm going to show you what was missed along the way. This is how it should go, and this is reflective of what actually happened with Lyndale here. And I know you've had this in advance if you had a chance to look at it. But typically, once we identify a project is in need of, like a Lyndale Avenue is in need of reconstruction, we put it in our capital improvement program. And we'll pick a ballpark number. In this case, we picked 10 million was our ballpark with a 20% contingency, 20% for legal, there's a contingency, then that leaves that much for construction. Typically, the ballparks are our best guess based on most recent, say, Portland Avenue's bid price or something like that. So that would get into the CIP, and that would be put in there about mid-2016. So, in mid-2016, we would have put this together for approvals for 17. Same thing on 18. That was put together in mid-2017. Nothing changed, right? In 2017, we were doing the public involvement process, trying to figure out what will Lyndale look like in the future. Towards the end of 2017, no, I keep doing that. This is a new clicker for me. We get our 30% design. So this 30% design, what that means is the council just approved preliminary design. So we've gotten through our public involvement process, which Jack and Scott are going to go over after this, but now we know what to expect on Lyndale. We know that there's going to be 3 new roundabouts. We know that we're going to have lanes here, medians there, whatever. We get our first engineer's estimate. So this is the first estimate that we would receive based on Lyndale. So this is actually a Lyndale estimate. We still have that 20% contingency because it's just lines and cross sections. It's no engineering's really went into it. And then typically what you would do is in the next CIP, you would use that estimate. And you would build your plan for funding the project now that you have some sort of project-related estimate. That did not happen. The estimate was not used to put together the CIP, and when you're going into final design, what you want to do, so the council's approved preliminary design, we're going to go into final design. What do you do next? You lock in your funding. So now we're going to put up together a 5-year street reconstruction plan. Council's going to approve it. There's going to be a resolution, and it's going to have a 30-day reverse referendum. So you want to make sure that's right and up to date. So that did not happen. The cost estimate and the CIP were not synced. Right before, so right in here between these two different columns, that's when we approved this, or you guys approved this, the 5-year street reconstruction plan, which reflected these same numbers that were used way back when. Right before the bid, so the bid, we want to go out to bid in the winter earliest in the year that we can. We get the 95% design, with still has that 20% contingency. Now the estimate is up even more, and primarily between these two, about $1.5 million in the difference of these two numbers is just inflation. It went up 11% one year and then 7% the next year. And then you can see the bid. So in any case, regardless of what our plan would have been, even if we would have followed this plan, we still wouldn't have had enough money identified in our financial plan to go forward to advertise. And that would have been what I would call a trigger for a council meeting to let's figure out how we're going to fund it. Are we going to pause the project? Are we going to bond more? Then we'd have to go through possibly another 30-day reverse referendum. You just have that discussion then. But that didn't happen, and so the project moved forward to advertising. The project eventually was awarded, came in about $1 million over. You don't see that reflected as much here because once you have a bid in hand, you can drop the contingency to 10% because you know what you're expecting it to cost. And then it wasn't until probably 8 weeks ago when I learned there wasn't a sources and uses completed for this project, and I did the sources and uses and learned that this was what we were talking about. And then, of course, I told Katie, and then we were all up to speed at this point. But so I don't know if there's any questions at this point, or if I should just cover this last column, which is where we're at. These are now that we're pretty much almost done with construction. This is the bottom line that we're looking at. We had a little bit, basically our change orders is what we have a contingency for, and there were really no surprises on this project. 27,000 in change orders is a pretty good number. We still are holding a little over a $200,000 contingency, but we're looking at about $2.9 million that was not identified before the project was advertised, bid, and then approved. So we got in 20, and I can move forward, and I'm going to refer to the 5-year plan that is approved. It's not the one with the draft on it. It's this one here, but I have it printed out so you can see. We had identified in 2019 9.7 in street reconstruction bonds. 2.2 of that was identified for 66th Street. We're proposing to move those funds to Lindale. 66th Street's eligible for more MSA, or municipal state aid dollars than we needed, or than we had identified to use towards it. So we can have access to that, and I'll show you 66th Street next. But and then the bonds that were sold last year, Chris ended up selling 3.1 in utility bonds over the 3 utilities so that the utility portion of Lindale would be paid down by those utilities. So that did not get used for the street reconstruction bonds. That was funded separately, and then the council opted to pull $1 million out of the LGA reserves to help bring down that bond as well. So It must have been 5.5 that was sold this year for street reconstruction bonds, and we're proposing another 3 million next year, which 2 million was already identified and approved, but we're adding 1 million to make up the difference. I went over the plan. This is just a close-up. I'm just showing that originally we had 12.5 approved in the resolution that went through the reverse referendum. And right now, we're proposing a total of, including the utility bonds, so a total of 8.5 in street reconstruction bonds and a total of 11.7 when you include the utility bonds. And then I'll ask if you have any questions on how these two are working together after this. This is 66th Street where we're at as of earlier this week. The yellow indicates that I'm waiting on actual numbers. There's still plenty of contingency built into these numbers. This was the engineer's best guess at what he thinks the city costs are going to be. You can see I have it at 13. Excel, that was their estimate. I'm waiting on final numbers. All of these are final numbers. Cedar Ridge is a $1.2 million contract. The other $300,000 we're looking for poetry and bridge lighting, which there's probably a good $200,000 built in there. So really, if anything, this is a high estimate on what it'll be. And where I'm looking at for the funding, this was originally 5.2 or 15.2 million in the street reconstruction bonds, and we're doing 13 million because we moved the 2.2 to Lindell. And this MSA number was 8.3, and we're looking at 2 more million out of the municipal state aid account. So what that means for the state aid is that we already advanced. So the reason we came on 8.3 for state aid was we had what we had as a balance, and we could advance 4 million more. And that equaled 8.3. That's what we identified for 66th Street, and then we bonded the rest. And now that it's years later, we can advance again. And so, and the 10.3 is how much eligibility 66th Street has for state aid funds. So now I'll just pause.
Councilmember Supple?
So just to clarify, when we increased that municipal state aid number, did some other projects get pushed back? Is that what happens, or where does that money come from?
It comes from, no, not necessarily. What we had identified was we would come into the black on our municipal state aid account in 2021. That was what was projected. And all we had identified was, we were kind of not identifying projects with MSA because of the underpass and what the big question mark is that the city is going to have to contribute to that project. We had identified 1 million of the money, and I've learned since then that only 700,000 of the underpass is actually eligible for MSA funds because you can't use municipal state aid funds in the state trunk highway right away, which the majority of the project is in. So 700 is what I've identified, and I still have that identified. That's part of the advancement. I'm including 700 for the underpass in what we're proposing. So really, if we advance what I'm suggesting, which is another 4 million, it's about 2023, somewhere in between the 2 years, 2023 and 2024, when we'd be back in a surplus on MSA.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Go ahead, continue.
Okay. So then 77th underpass, I guess the colors aren't showing up very well. But there's low risk is green, and I guess that's okay if you can't see that well. But I got the design and the right of way and the legal fees and the labor at a low risk. And this is kind of based on risk, something that we'll talk about with our procedures moving forward as well. And then the yellow is a medium risk. So the construction, that is the engineer's best guess at what the construction costs will be in 2021 based on a solid design. We know how much concrete is expected to go into that, things like that. I've got the Three Rivers Park Trail and the MnDOT as a medium risk because although we have verbal agreements and we're working towards that, we don't have anything in writing that says they're actually going to contribute those funds at this point. But we expect them to. The highest risk on this is the $7 million that we have requested for state bonding for 2020. Obviously, everything else is as it shows. The project is still on track for 2021, assuming we get the $7 million, we're successful, 2021 construction. But we do need to have it authorized by June of 2020, which means we have to have all of the approvals in place, environmental, the design's in for final approval for the bridge, and then we also need to have the right-of-way in hand. We do not have to have the funding complete to get authorization, but if we're going to build it in 2021, we need to have the funding. And then finally, I have this proposed 5-year plan, which is, there's a printout. Really, it just reflects everything that I spoke about. If the plan or the recommendation with Lindell is something that the council is okay with, and that would be to basically sell $3 more million next year of street reconstruction bonds, then we would need basically a resolution on the next agenda to, it's a reimbursement resolution that we can spend the money before we sell the bond. I think that's the only thing left to do to keep that on track.
Goes back 60 days
Yep.
from the date of the resolution.
Mhm.
You use the proceeds for those
Right.
costs.
But it does reflect moving 65th Street out and moving these other projects out a year that was talked about earlier. And also, I just want to point out, there's another $1.2 million bond sale that would be included next year. And that is regarding 65th Street, and that is the estimate for lining the water. We're planning on lining the water main next spring, early summer, and that's the bid cost for that. And if we were planning on financing it with the project in 2021, and we were just going to carry that debt until we sold the bond. But if we sell it next year, then that gives some flexibility on when we would do 65th if there was a desire for the council to not do that one in 2021. So.
Councilmember Whalen?
So can you say a bit more about that 1.2 million? Is that now, I understand we'd be selling the bond next year. Would that be, as a utility bond, would that also be paid back with utility costs? And would that start next year, or would it wait until the full project?
It would start the year that you sell the bond, the payments begin the very next year. So it would be paid down by the utility, the water utility, and it would start in 2021.
Okay, so we've effectively separated that piece from the rest of the project.
Right, and so actually moving forward, and that's a good point. So I mentioned on Lindell that there was just over 3 million sold in utility bonds this year. We had determined last year that moving forward with our capital projects, although street reconstruction bonds can pay for utilities, we were gonna start having the utilities pay their portion of those bonds to help, reduce the burdens, for the levy. And what we learned was if you're gonna have the utility pay down any portion of a bond, it needs to be specific to that utility. So that 3 million we sold was like 1.2 to water, 1 million to sewer, whatever those estimates came in at once the bid was opened is what we sold for each individual utility. And so that would be water only because it's just lining the water.
Councilmember Troutman?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Garcia. Could you clarify just a little bit of the process when we say those, like they're bonding the utilities? Is this that people pay the cost of the bond through their utilities? Does that go on? So it's the same, assuming that a homeowner uses the utilities, they're still paying the same rate. It's just falling on different on different bills.
I mean, yeah, it's all paid through the operations of the utility funds. So, basically, that's one reason why rates are tending to increase a little bit, because there's a lot of debt service requirements in the utility funds right now, but there's no separate line item that says debt service on a resident's bill or anything like that. It's just if the, your utility fund pays the debt service, as simple as that.
No, just for the sake of transparency to the community, when they understand what,
Yeah.
it's the same cohort of people that are paying the same price. It's just coming out of different pockets. Is that kind of?
Well, when people pay their bills, it goes into the utility fund, and then all the operational costs, the payroll costs, everything, and then the debt service all comes out of the same utility fund. So that answers your question.
So like, for instance, the water on Lindale is going to increase the operations budget by about 50 grand a year.
Okay.
And our budget for, water is a lot more than 50 grand a year. It's not that high of a percentage. I wouldn't say that these street reconstruction portions are increasing the utilities that much, but we sold bonds to do the water tower. I mean, there's significant bonds that utility's paying down that are much more significant than them paying their fair share of a street reconstruction.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Sure.
So the utility funds are enterprise funds, which of course Chris knows, and so those fees are supposed to cover not just the operations of delivering that water, but also the paying for the infrastructure. And so even on Lindale, there was the part of that bond issue that we did last year was paid for by the utility funds. And on 65th Street, the utility portion was always going to be paid by the water fund. It's just it was going to be part of that bond issue that would also be for reconstructing the street. So now we've separated them. And we've separated them to give us flexibility on 65th, because you're going to have a big decision on the 77th underpass, and we just don't have all the information to give that to you right now.
Right. And then the other reason why you would want to sell it early is because otherwise Chris would have to figure out how to carry that $1.2 million debt for another year before the bond was sold. So it helps with just cash flow as well. My understanding? Okay. Anything else on this? I guess that was you next.
Councilmember Troutman.
Sure, and I think maybe we're getting into the 5-year plan. The agenda isn't quite as clear for this work session in my mind, so if I'm jumping ahead, but as we're kind of looking back for feedback from the council as to what we think about bonding, I've raised the concern mildly, and I'm going to raise it a little more strongly now. I don't feel comfortable with our big picture plan, because if we paid for the plan, it wouldn't put us in a great as I understand it, if we paid everything that's in the plan, then we're not going to be in a good place, which says, well, maybe that's not a good plan if that puts us in a financially precarious place if we follow it. And I understand there are a lot of moving pieces, and so I want to give you guys a chance to reflect on that. And so I recognize that it's more complicated than it is, but it's so complicated that now we're having to bond an extra $3 million. So I need it to be simpler for me, because I'm not super sophisticated, and I also want to try and get more comfortable with what the long-term plan is before, or not before, but as we pay, we're going to pay our bills. We're going to pay our bill. But I just feel a little lost in this process. So,
Just a point of clarification. It's we as Christian said, we had initially planned to issue $2 million of debt in 2024 Lindale, so we've increased that to $3 million. So it's $1 million, and the $1.2 million is also new debt. But that's a water utility bond. It'll be a geo water utility bond. As I said, it would be paid out of the utility fund. And as Katie said, the rates, rates that are set in each utility fund are supposed to cover all those costs. And there's no effect on the tax levy. The only effect on the tax levy is with the additional $1 million that will affect the tax levy to a certain extent. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
but the bigger picture question is how do And in
Well,
5 years, if
basically-
we follow the plan, where are we going to be?
Basically, the way the plan is proposed right now, you've got street reconstruction bonds in there. You've got at least one utility bond. I imagine there'll be one other bond for utilities because the 7.8 million for 65th Street will probably be either storm and sanitary sewer that hasn't been identified yet. So that may reduce the tax levy portion down and increase the utility portion and stuff. But the main impact that would, if we'd follow the entire plan, would be on the utility funds and on the taxpayers, on the tax levy. That's basically what's going to happen if this plan is followed to the letter. I mean, that's, again, but that's a policy decision for the council to make.
So,
Councilmember Supple?
So I guess just a follow-up to that, I'm concerned about the debt levy. Are we going to talk about that later?
I've got estimates in the next slide. Oops.
So I'll pause and wait, but I think that's something that needs to be considered.
right, so I hear what you're saying, Simon, and just what we're talking about here, our plan was approved for 12.5 million in street reconstruction bonds, and what we're proposing would be a total of about 8.5. So it is a reduction in what our plan was. And so this new plan, I know what you're talking about is moving forward. 65th Street would be probably the most pressing one that I think, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I would think everybody can see the need on 65th Street. Those other ones, I mean, they're getting far enough out that it's possible. 2023, I just said, that's when I think our MSA will be back in the black. And if we can advance it, I've heard that you can bond against your MSA. So, I mean, maybe there's other options that we can look at than just street reconstruction bonds. Street reconstruction bonds was the council's choice a number of years ago over assessing. And I think I agree with the choice. I think it's the right way to approach it. But maybe we look at other options moving forward. So I hear what you're saying. You ready?
All right, this is the most updated version of the KFS. I would look on year 2022 on line 33. That is our proposed or estimated levy for that year of 5.18%.
Oh, this one.
And that's really based on the two street reconstruction bonds in 2022. One was issued in 2021 or 2020 for the Lindale Avenue project, approximately $201,000 a year. And then the other one is estimated at 7.8 million, issued in 2021. And the first debt service payment is in 2022 of $536,000. Those are the biggest impacts right there. And the tax levy, total debt service special levy jumps up from 2021 to 2022 based on the 65th Street bond issues. You can see there from 5.1 to 5.6. And then it slowly increments up a little bit each year when there's a new debt service levy for 69th Street and then for 70th Street. And then we get way out into 2026 and 2027. Again, as Kristen says, you know, some of those projects we may not have to issue so much debt, or we can use MSA money to bond against and things like that. So I did reduce, to help a little bit, I did reduce the estimated interest rate on those two bonds, early bonds, Lindale and 65th Street. I dropped it down to 3% and then to 3.25. I based that solely on the 2019 A bond. Our true interest cost was 2.63%, and I know the Fed is thinking about lowering interest rates again. So those interest rates, I hopefully are conservative, and when we do issue, they'll come in a little less if the council decides to issue and stuff. So I don't know if that answers your question, Councilmember Supple, but it kind of shows how the debt service levy goes with all the estimated bond issues.
So I'm following these numbers, but what I'm wondering is there a point at which your debt levy is too high or the debt load is too high? I know we're below that, but are we starting to approach a point where it's?
We still have a lot of room. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I know we're not in danger of surpassing that at this point in time.
That's good. Councilmember Troutman?
Would we be in danger in 2027?
I'd have to go and look. I don't know off the top of my head. It's based on market value, 3% of market value. So as if our market value continues to increase, then we should be okay.
What are the chances that our market value
Oh.
continues to increase over than the same
Look
level?
on lines 53 through 56.
On which page?
On the first page, right at the bottom, 53 through 56. So it shows what our unused debt limit is. So I forgot that was on there. I apologize.
Okay, thanks.
That should help.
Okay, city manager?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So what we discussed when we had the key financial strategies update before is what we're trying to do is smooth out the debt levy and the impact on our property tax levy. And we may need to reassess the 2023 and 2024. We have some minor debt relief in 2021 and 2022, but then we have a major TIF rolling off in 2026 that should help mitigate taking on further debt. And then 2029 and 2030, I know that's a long way out, but that's when we start paying off these initial debt issues. And then as you're paying off those debt issues, you can add debt. So then you're in a more sustainable, financially sustainable pattern. So we do have, unfortunately, we've got a couple years here, 23, 24, 25, that are adding to the debt without having TIF rolling off or having other debt issues roll off. And so we do need to look at that. I am concerned about that, the long-term picture. And we did discuss it before.
Councilmember Whalen?
I think this is a great conversation to be having. I will say, I mean, already looking at some of the most recent years, we'd kind of gotten into a habit of bonding the maximum 10 million pretty much every year. And so, yes, I think we need to keep being wary of how much debt we're taking on and such, but I appreciate that we've started kind of spreading those out and none of the projections for the next 5 years have us bonding the maximum. And so I think we're moving the right direction. And yeah, I think it certainly is a question of how much can we assume what our market value will do. But I know in addition to just what the market does naturally, we are also adding a lot of great assets to our community. And so I think that red number along the bottom of kind of how much gap we have between the recommended ceiling of how much debt we should have, I think that is relatively steady, and that's a good indicator of where we're going.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Oh, that's what
Okay.
we've talked
So you
about.
already
Yeah.
behind the times.
This is just the 2020 capital improvement budget. The major changes here are Lindale Avenue reconstruction. The $3 million worth of bonds are now in there. They weren't in there originally, and they should have been. That's on me. I just didn't think to put them in. I should have. And also we've got the water main lining on 65th and under 35W. We added those down in the public facilities of $1.2 million and $580,000. Those are the major changes in this document here. And then this just continues with the whole 2021 through 2024 and beyond and stuff. Shows it's updated with 77th Street underpass and also the 65th Street reconstruction and everything. So and it shows the 69th Street project in 2023 and the 70th in 2024, which syncs in with the key financial strategies worksheet.
Anything? Okay. So any questions on the numbers? Otherwise,
There's a lot of them.
No, yeah,
or anything?
I had
go ahead.
just a question about the margin, the line 55 on the last slide.
Mhm.
Could you just someone just explain a little, what does that mean? How do we determine what that margin is? And is that based on what we need to do to preserve our credit rating, or how do we come across, how do we come to that number?
Line 55 is all outstanding debt that are paid solely from taxes. So if we have special assessment bonds where a portion is paid with special assessments and a portion is paid with taxes, that bond wouldn't be included in that, or at least only the tax portion of the bond would be included.
I'm sorry, can you just say that one more time?
Okay, line 55 is basically all outstanding debt that's paid solely from taxes.
Okay. So then when we, for example, finance that $1 million through the utility fees, those don't fall on this?
No,
Okay,
tax increment bonds don't fall under this either.
okay. And I guess my concern with that is that it's still the same number that our residents have to pay, whether it
Well, they-
comes through their utilities or it comes through this. So that's where as I being simple, just want to get my arms around our whole financial picture. I find things like that frustrating just because of my ignorance, right? To just say, I just want to see what the whole big picture is. And it's hard to see that big picture if I don't know what I don't know, and I'm trying to learn what I need to know, but then I'm like, oh, well, here are these fees and so I'm still, I'm just publicly, because I can only talk about it public because it's a public meeting. I'm publicly just saying I need to understand better, and it's hard to do that in just a session like this to say, where are we going? I want to be able to go to my constituents and say, we are on a solid financial path. And when they say, well, our fees are going up here or there, I don't want to point to line 55 and then they're saying, well, that's not inclusive of the bigger picture.
Councilmember Whalen?
To put it simply, and maybe I'm being too trusting, but if I'm understanding correctly what staff is saying, that the things that aren't included in line 55, especially the utility debt, the rates we have are already designed to pay that, if I'm understanding correctly, that
Yeah.
yes. It's already built. It's not like we are going to need to hike the rates a ton each time we add those debts.
Okay.
They're already designed to cover the maintenance that we know we're going to need to do.
So that $1 million doesn't actually increase the fee?
So the 1.2 million that we're proposing to issue next year, as opposed to part of the issue for 2021, we're just changing the timing of that.
Okay.
It would have been issued in 2021. It was always the plan for the water fund to cover those expenses. And that's sound financial practices.
Oh, and I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that it's not sound. I'm just confessing I'm not seeing how all the pieces move together. So as I'm trying to understand, not that it's not sound, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just trying to get my arms wrapped around it. So
Yeah. If I'm hearing you correctly,
Yep.
it is our residents that are paying for these infrastructure projects, whether it's through water fees or whether it's through street reconstruction bonds,
Right.
which is a debt levy, which is out of their property taxes. I hear you. We take it really seriously. It's a tough issue because we've got infrastructure that is crumbling and we've got to address it. Sometimes we have some time where we can wait, which 69th and 70th, we've got it on our plan. But what I heard from Kristen when we did the budget originally was we're going to reassess those and see if we can extend them out a year if we can't. But it depends on what the condition of the infrastructure is. I mean, the Lindale reconstruction project, I wasn't here in the initial stages, but my understanding is those outside lanes, we couldn't drive on them. So that's how bad it had gotten.
Right.
no, I think that's good, and to the extent that I can understand it better and communicate it better to our constituents, that's helpful. I mean, I think when you sit down with any resident and you say, well, the bad news is that your property taxes are going to go up, 76% over the next decade, but the good news is that there are other fees that you don't know about that are also going to go up. We want to be able to communicate that frankly.
Right.
And then explain, and you got to put a new roof on and you don't have the cash, you have to get a mortgage, or, or you need to repair the foundation. We need to repair the foundation of our city. And so I'm not questioning the need. I'm going to continue to espouse my lack of understanding, so I can move forward.
So just
Kristen?
one last thought on that, though. So the street reconstruction bonds were great because they could pay for utilities, because what was happening was when we did the roundabout, it was like a million in water and we didn't, so then we paid cash, $1 million for the water. And then when we learned about street reconstruction bonds, that was a federal project, but feds and state monies won't pay for utilities. And so when we learned and we chose street reconstruction, we could do it, we wouldn't be able to do any of these reconstructions if we had to pay cash out of our utility, right? So we were doing the reconstruction bonds. It does help reduce the hit on the resident to have the utilities pay for their portion, because we aren't raising, the rates are going up in utilities, but that's not related to the small amount of debt service that we're paying on these capital projects. It helps us be able to pay and fund them through our utility. But I mean, we're talking about 50 grand for Lindale for each utility, say. I think sewer was 30 grand. I mean, it's not that much. And we're doing 400,000 in lining on our sewer a year.
Yep.
That's where we have needs everywhere. I'll just say that. But that's what's going to raise the rate. It's not, it doesn't help, but we still need to replace the sewer when we're taking the road up. So
Rates
I don't know
do-
if that helps at all.
Well, and the
Simon.
rates do have to take into account the existing debt service. I mean, because you don't want to go into negative cash in utility funds. You want to have a positive cash balance and a positive fund balance in those funds. So the rates do take into account the debt service, but it's not like they're going up exponentially because of that.
Yeah, if we weren't doing the lining and sewer, we probably wouldn't be raising the rate more than inflation anyway, because of this. But, okay.
But the rate raise here, just so I understand the increase in the property tax, this is the percentage that people are likely going to pay, but it's also assuming an increased value in the property over 7 years. And I think people understand that if I made $25,000 this year in equity on my property, that makes sense that I would pay something for it. But I think they'd probably also have the expectation that, if things slowed down, but we still have our plan, that we have a contingency that says if our property values don't grow as much, it'd be one thing if you say, well, this is what you're going to pay if you get a tax, if you get your taxes are going to go up if you get a salary raise. It's like, well, you didn't get that raise this year, but the government does need the taxes. That'd be a harder pill to swallow.
We've got to move right along because we've got another item on the agenda.
Okay, and I just wanted to, is this working now? Okay, so, and then moving forward, this was included in your staff report packet for the meeting, but we've put some financial, the city manager and the finance director and myself worked on putting together some procedures in writing. You would think these look a little common sensey. But to get them in writing, I think is good practice, so they're formalized now. There's some things that, a lot of this stuff, and I can just say that this would never happen again under my watch. I think I learned a lesson, not keeping track of things and letting people let you think they're doing their job. But, so a lot of this is kind of what I would say is standard practice, but some of it is new. We'll, at a minimum, update those budgets as part of the CIB process. I'll make sure I see an engineer's estimate that's related to those moving forward. Those updates will be provided minimally annually, and then they'll be shared with the finance director and the city manager. On city council items, we'll attach the sources and uses, which I think is good practice. That's what I did when I was managing projects. So you can go look at the old staff reports. You would see the sources and uses, levels of risk. So I did put together, and I'll show you after, what Lindale might have looked like had we been following this procedure. Multi-year projects will be broken out by the years that those funds will be needed or expended. And then, of course, now the staff report approvals that goes through our process will add the finance director to those approvals. Which of course is good practice. And then the bidding, the biggest thing here is to make sure everything's in line, and that if we get bids then that are above or over what we have identified for funding sources, that will pause and make sure that everything lines up. And so I don't know if you want to add anything, Katie, or if,
Just that this is your chance to give some feedback on these procedures if you're.
Councilmember Supple.
So am I understanding correctly that what we've kind of added is an internal audit process and that Finance Director Regis is going to be the internal auditor to make sure everybody's following the procedures? I think that would be really good practice.
Yep.
So that's a good step in my opinion.
I think it's even, Mayor Pro Tem, I think it's even more robust than that. I think it's adding Chris and me into a regular process of updating it. It's also giving you more information and assessing risk with the funding sources
Mhm.
and the expenditures. So
so.
No, I have a level of comfort with this, what
Yeah.
you're saying,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a good thing to have in place. And I won't go over this because of the time too much. This is what I would expect. And now, of course, the colors aren't there. Or did I? Oh, this isn't the latest one. Okay, well, in any case, I had the greens and the yellows and the reds showing the risk as we move along. So they would have been all yellow at the beginning because it's just a ballpark and da-da-da. So this is what I expect as we move along would be attached to any major decisions on the council staff reports moving forward. Okay.
Any other questions
Thank you.
on the moving forward?
Oh, so I do sense that we're okay with the plan. Not that we're
Yes.
happy, but
Yes.
I think risk mitigation, being able to tell where the risks are is really important.
No, and thank you for, for actually giving us all this information so that we can look at it and study it. And I feel comfortable because I think with the three of you getting together all the time, I think it fills a void so that, there's not, it's all a continual process that will benefit all of us. Mhm. Ben?
If I understand correctly, I think your question was also about the plan for the new financing plan for Lindale, and I just want to thank. I know staff put in a lot of time and a fair amount of stress, and as soon as you realized that there was this gap, and I think there's a lot of kind of ugly ways that a $3 million gap could get resolved, and I think you did a great job of finding ways to minimize the impact on kind of the long-term plan, the other projects we need to do, as well as on the residents. So thank you for the work that went into it. I appreciate the plan.
Okay, let's move to the presentation of the Public Works Department engagement process for the reconstruction projects. Should I call on Scott first?
Jack will be going first.
Oh, okay, where's Jack? Oh, Jack, I'm sorry.
I'm the
I'm
short
looking over
guy.
here because you were just right here just a minute ago. Okay, Jack.
Thank you. Everything you're about to hear, I think you've heard, but maybe what you haven't heard it is in a continuous stream. I'll talk big picture about what Sweet Streets were about and how we hope that they were guiding us to better asset investment when we talk about all those dollars and where they're spent, what we're getting. Scott will then take at the end and he'll talk about some of the very detailed stuff that details the communication. Again, everything we're about to say you've heard, but maybe just in a continuous flow might help understand what our new process, we've documented this as a process. So our Sweet Streets, again, our goal is to build better assets. It's gonna go.
well, I think it just needs to be pointed maybe in the block.
So we maybe all remember these streets. That was Portland back in the day. And this is Portland today. So you see it's a different kind of asset. That's Wayne. He lives on Portland. His life has been changed forever. And so these are the goals that we have. They're fairly lofty for engineers. But those are some of the aspirations that we try to base our process on. Here's some sidewalk poetry, the Poetry on Portland program, where we work at the community values on our new streets. And we're starting to see some of these indications. So see, these are a couple of clippings from the past about housing markets, redevelopment in the city of Richfield. Here's just an article calling Richfield the best suburb. So how are we getting there? I guess that's what we're thinking Sweet Streets are about. We got there, we started this we grabbed in 2013, council and the Transportation Commission along with several other, and we came up with these guiding principles. We've talked about these again in the past. These were in rank order, so multimodal, walking, bicycling, all these things are very important. But health, our unique location, local economy, all of these things came out of a workshop process that said, where's Richfield going to be 50 years from now? What do we need to cater to? And that's before we actually started Portland and 66th Street. So theoretically, you know, as we look at this process, on the right, you see guiding principles. On the left, to make it safer to walk and bike, you first have to do the simple things and do them right. You know, so like ADA, but you don't necessarily change a lot of people's habits by making better curb ramps. So safety becomes the next level up, and as you move along, you start to go higher and higher up the ramp. But truth is, for the engineers, is that we can't hit the button. We can only take it so far, because at the end of the day, like with the Arts Commission, they're the ones that's going to bring it to life. That's not necessarily, we can build a sidewalk, but we can't bring it to life for the community. So we have to foster those things. So we need a process that has better community input to do that, to get to that community answer. So now again, this is philosophical. On the far right, you see what engineers like. We have a problem. We do things and we see if we solve the problem. Our process at Sweet Streets is designed to start on the left column, work with the community. What kind of issues do they have? What are the things we need to do to address those problems? Because at the end of the day, there's only going to be one solution. In the center is our regulatory problem. So bigger words to help understand. So we need to make a comprehensive problem statement. You'll see in a moment how we work towards that. Things like crossing the street are huge factors for people in the community. Environmental justice is another aspect, and speeding is often a challenge for a street design. Overall, our process, when we start at the beginning, we do our technical work. We know the road was falling apart. That's easy. Utilities are falling apart. But what's unique to Richfield is our Transportation Commission. That is embedding a public process every step of the way. As we step through this, you see our open house 1. After we start to talk about what's wrong with the project, we present an open house 1 and we gather problems. That's all we want to hear from people. We're about to do this on Penn study. So that's all we're going to ask people. What's wrong with Penn? As we get into Open House 2, we calibrate that problem statement that we heard, and we show potential things, like maybe a median, or maybe these are the things that can fix that. We call them tools. By the time we get to the third open house, and all through this, again, there's a Transportation Commission, but the third open house is when we bring a layout, or 3. We could maybe combine it like this, maybe we can combine it like, and then we start to critique those and get public input on those 3, ... So we, on 66th Street, how many did we have?
We had 5
We had,
open house number 3s.
we did this 5 times. 5 times to get it so that we had a clear direction through the Transportation Commission, and the council did have input. At the end, we have a final recommendation, and the recommendation comes from the Transportation to council. So see, we've shifted it away from the technical, from staff to the public. Our master plan, again, is not based on how many people walk today, but how many could be walking in the future based on all of those values I said earlier. We talked about how we then bring that down for the technical people to understand that all crossings are not built the same. So here's Augsburg Park. So you see the experience that we're trying to achieve. We're guiding them through our pedestrian plan to pay attention to land use. and people doing things, I guess is the best way to say it. This slide is kind of technical. What it does, though, let me highlight this one right here, if I can hit next. This is from Federal Highway Guidance. They're telling engineers that when people tell them they feel unsafe, that is truly unsafe. So that's like a hammer for engineers that love data. And so when you have people telling you, believe me, that's a different way to perceive it. And that's what we try to build into our process. And this is, I think, what people instinctively, we've probably used this slide multiple times. It's a chart that shows at different speeds. So at 20 miles an hour, risk of severe injury is fairly low, but as speeds climb to 30, which is our residential speed limit, you see it becomes a 50-50 chance if somebody actually gets hit at that speed. And when you get to our arterial streets, 40 miles an hour is extremely, and this is what people instinctively know when they tell you it feels unsafe. You don't necessarily need to see a crash to understand this problem. And I'm hitting buttons. So we're engineers, we do it in great detail. So like, for example, the pedestrian mode, this is in your presentation, but so things like speed of traffic, the distance they have to cross, how many lanes they have to cross. So this is what we do on the technical side to see if we can capture that pedestrian experience. And so that's the overarching process. We do that for other modes, for the bicycling and transit and the vehicle mode. And then what I'm going to give it to Scott now to talk about any one of those public input points as to how the details are played out. And this gets to you in your meeting summaries.
All right. Thank you, Jack. Mayor Pro Tem, council members, my name is Scott Kulzer. I'm an administrative aid analyst with the Public Works Department. We're going to walk through kind of a mock public engagement case study with the past open house we had held, Lyndale open house number 3. We'll deviate from that open house a little bit on the next slide, actually, but what you can see here is a Sweet Streets postcard mailer. It's one of our favorite methods of alerting the public to our upcoming open houses. We do not send these citywide. It is rather expensive to mail these out, but we do target nearby residents to most project corridors. As you'll see on this slide, Jack had mentioned an upcoming Penn corridor study. There we go. So an upcoming Penn corridor study we're doing in conjunction with community development. The county's looking at reconfiguring not the layout per se, but what the surface of the street looks like. So what we're going to do going forward here later this month is send out a mailer to these 2,300 residents, alerting them directly in their mailbox of this upcoming open house. We find this gets some of the most important stakeholders in the neighborhood to attend these open houses. And then to reach the larger community, the folks that might not have been in that blue highlighted area, one of our favorite strategies is to employ newspaper ads. With our Sweet Streets branding, we've been able to create more catchy newspaper ads that look more like a commercial advertisement than a legal notice. And we find we get good reception from these as well. For Lyndale Open House number 3, our case study here, we had done 2 consecutive newspaper ads, and we found out that that worked really well. We have different strategies for newspaper ads. In the past, we've done 4 consecutive advertisements, alerting residents of a council decision on roundabouts on 66th Street at Lyndale, Nicollet, and at the 35W crossing, which ultimately did not happen. I'm sure you're pretty familiar with our social media outreach. We love social media. Neil and I love to promote the open houses here. So preceding an open house, we plug it a lot. Before open house number 3, we shared it 8 different times on the Sweet Streets page and the main city page. And here's just some different examples of social media ads. And these are nice because they have a compounding effect when folks share them. When they get picked up by the Richfield Bike Advocates, when they get picked up by the community page, and it helps really to alert people to these events. Now, we are well aware that not everyone uses social media. I think it's not even a majority of our residents. So we like to use analog methods to promote the projects. We have sandwich boards we put along the project corridors nowadays. Those are 65th Street ones. We like to use changeable message signs at City Hall and at Vets Park. And then if there's hyper-local project impacts for any given project, we'll do targeted mailings to even a subset of residents within that initial mailing area. This is an example of a letter. I know you can't read it, but this was a letter we sent to residents who would have been affected by the access changes on Blaisdell, Wentworth, and Pillsbury at 65th Street. So in sum, between all these methods, we like to think that we're kind of casting a wide net. It's not a perfect process. We wish we could reach everyone individually, but we cannot. So between the mailings, the ads, signs, social media, sharing, our Sweet Street website, our emails to those subscribers, our community calendar on the City of Richfield website, we like to think we reach as many people as we can. So now moving from the lead up to an open house to an actual open house, obviously we have folks sign in. Here's 2 sign-in sheets from Lyndale Open House number 3. There's actually 6 fully filled out sheets. In an ideal world, everyone would give their address and their phone number and their email address, but not everyone's comfortable doing so, and we understand. These folks will get added to our Sweet Street subscriber list, and they'd be in the loop for the next open house or important council decisions related to this project. I'm sure you're all familiar, but each open house has a variety of a comment card or a survey asking for feedback. Jack mentioned the comprehensive problem statement. We'll ask right off the bat, have the themes from the previous open house been captured with our display boards? Do you feel the problem statement reflects the community's feeling towards X, Y, or Z? So on and so forth. And then the open house number 3 is kind of where the rubber hits the road. So in this instance, this was a 6-page comment card, I think. Here's just 2 screen grabs of it. Specific scenarios for specific stretches of street. Tell us why you hate it, tell us why you love it, and what you hate and what you love about it. We want the feedback. And as you can see, some of these scenarios are actually what is being built on Lyndale. Following the open house, the consultant or city staff, depending on the project, will summarize all that raw data we got from the comment cards, from the expansive layouts on these tables here where people put sticky notes. So we'll create a big summary. What were common themes? What did we hear the most? And if we're able to turn that data into fancy bar graphs like this, we will. That's not always the case. But from this, we'll get a summary, which we will bring to the Transportation Commission. This is the agenda following that February 20th Lyndale Avenue Open House number 3. As you can see where I highlighted on the agenda there, that is the bulk of this Transportation Commission meeting. And this loops back to what Jack was talking about, how the Transportation Commission is really unique to Richfield. I think they spent well over 60 minutes, frankly, at that meeting talking about the findings from Open House number 3.
No, we've got to be wrapping it up too.
Yes,
Yeah.
we've got one slide left, I believe. And then again, with these Transportation Commission meetings, we're also plugging that, doing recaps for the public. And the summaries get posted on Sweet Streets, get sent to council. And then again, just hitting on this flow chart here. That was a brief walkthrough of an open house number 3. Jack mentioned, Kristen mentioned, if we don't get a desirable result from that, the Transportation Commission doesn't, we'll loop back and do it again. If our findings are pointful and we feel moving forward with the council recommendation, we'll do so. That was fast, sorry.
Okay, any quick questions?
I just wanted to add a comment, Mayor Pro Tem.
Sure.
On that process, if you recall, for those that were on the council when we were going through Lyndale, that we did have work sessions that we popped in when we realized Lyndale wasn't going to be so straightforward and we were coming up with issues. We actually had a joint Transportation Commission and council meeting. So that this isn't the end of the process, it's the beginning. So that's all.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you for the presentation. And thank you also for, the paramount issue is make sure that we contact and work with the public. And I think you've made every effort to do so. And that's certainly appreciated. And I think those of us that do social media should also include it in your own social media packet or whatever. Okay, anything else?
Mayor Pro Tem, I just wanted to share that even before I was here in Richfield, I would hear when I was at Met Council just what a great job that Richfield did on this with their engagement process. So it is
Good.
region leading.
Good. And we're doing better all the time. Okay, we'll adjourn this meeting and get on to the next.
Thank you.